President Erdogan wants to come to the White House. We have a very good relationship. The ceasefire has held very nicely. We've kept the oil. We stayed back and kept the oil. Other people can patrol the border of Syria, frankly, and Turkey. Let them. They've been fighting for 1,000 years. Let them do the border. We don't want to do that. We want to bring our soldiers home. But we did leave soldiers because we're keeping the oil. I like oil. We're keeping the oil, and we're working with the Kurds.
You know, when people ask me, why do I support Gabbard? She doesn't meet all of the boxes that you check from the standpoint of a candidate. She has certain qualms, this kind of quasi-political thing. And they would point out one issue after the next that they think that I should, for the most part, demurrer in my support for Gabbard. I've said on more than one occasion, when it comes to issues of foreign policy, Tulsi Gabbard tends to be my sword. And I want her on the debate stage as my sword, knocking down various neocon ideas, things that I don't particularly like, that I don't believe that the other Democratic candidates will bring up or engage on. Donald Trump in that moment has just said that he is stealing oil from the Syrian government. Pursuant to this, our troops who put on the uniform in order to protect this country, at this point, because of the actions of the President of the United States of America, has now become thieves, riding around oil fields to prevent the rightful government from getting their oil and getting their land back. This is extraordinary. I know I do this story because I am blown away by this story. Naked, open imperialism, where the President of the United States essentially admits that we entered a country under false pretense for the goal of knocking down the rightful government of that country for economic and geopolitical reasons. This oil field, Syria has never been a major oil producing nation. Never. They're taking this and this tract of land in order to starve the Syrian government of various resources that they need to operate. The only person that is in this race, the only person that I've heard say anything about it at all, that have even mentioned it, that has even breathed a word of this rank, naked imperialism where the President of the United States says he wants to rub his body in oil and he is going to steal that very specific oil where he's going to rub his body in from Syria. That is extraordinary. I don't care that he uses the term protect. Theft, protect, those are points of view, right? And one point of view can be disingenuous when they're making that particular point of view. And the media in the United States, and the political class in the United States looks at this and says, fair game. Donald Trump lies as easily as breathing, but on this very specific point, fair game. We are in somebody else's country thousands of miles away. We are not on the border of Oklahoma. We are in somebody else's country thousands of miles away. And the president, behaving as a king, has just claimed resources that did not belong to the United States, but is using military force to steal those resources. Of everybody in this race, one person said something about it. Tulsi Gabbard. Welcome to the Soapbox.
States.
My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal or Patreon. These videos are instantly demonetized, so even $1 helps. This content is brought to you by you. I want you to hear, this is Dana Stroll. Ben Norton put this video up. This woman is a neocon. She looks at the world of the lens that the United States, for the most part, can impose its will on other nations, and those other nations are supposed to just accept it. Listen to what she's talking about from the standpoint of Syria. This is the strategy that we've been using in order to starve and to injure the Syrian government and prevent them, after supporting terrorists in order to destroy 500,000 lives. This is a strategy that we've been using to make their lives just miserable.
Still had compelling forms of leverage on the table to shape an outcome that was more conducive and protective of U.S. interests. And we identified 4. So the first one was the 1/3 of Syrian territory that was owned via the U.S. military with its local partner, the Syrian Democratic Forces. Now,
Owned? You mean taken? And the Syrian Democratic Forces are just terrorists. They're just terrorists. The Kurds are trying to create Kurdistan. In World War I, or before World War I, during the Ottoman Empire, for the most part, they had multiple cultures in that region, but they could go throughout because all of those things were under the Ottoman Empire. Well, the Ottoman Empire got into the war and lost. And after they lost, the Brits became masters of the world. And the Brits broke up those areas into various countries. Well, those countries, you persist in time, but the Kurds never quite accepted that and never liked this idea of these borders and wanted to create Kurdistan. Now, from the standpoint of what has taken place in Syria, they have this area, this patch of land called Rojava that the United States has essentially been propping up. When Trump pulled out, well, Rojava wasn't going to be able to sustain itself from a Turkish assault. The Syrian military made deals with the Kurds in order to create some semi-autonomous region, but at the same token, acknowledging that the Syrian government is the government. We are not necessary in this process. We are not needed in this process. Russia is going to help Bashar al-Assad take his land back. I don't care one iota because I don't live there. It's not my land. Russia has been accepted in. Iran has been accepted in. And just because the United States and the media class looks at those people as outright enemies and hostile to our interests, I don't live there. I don't live there. We don't live there. That is not our territory. In the same way that we can make deals with that totalitarian state that chops off heads and put heads on spikes, Saudi Arabia, Syria, sovereign nation, can make deals and have allies all they want. It's none of my business. And if I'm being honest, we have not worked to the betterment of that country, seeing as what we were doing in that country to try to knock down Bashar al-Assad. And now we're going to steal the oil.
Now, this was a light footprint on the U.S. military, only about 1,000 troops over the course of the Syria Study Group's report, and then the tens of thousands of forces, both Kurdish and Arab, under the Syrian Democratic Forces. And that 1/3 of Syria is the resource-rich, it's the economic powerhouse of Syria. So where the hydrocarbons are, which obviously is very much in the public debate here in Washington these days, as well as the agricultural powerhouse. But we argued that it wasn't just about this 1/3 of Syrian territory.
By the way, it's not a debate. It's not a debate. Me and Tulsi Gabbard doesn't make it a debate. The media class has accepted it. The political class has accepted it. For all intents and purposes, across the board, nobody is complaining about the legalities associated with, illegalities associated with the President of the United States deciding to steal oil and use our military to do so. Listen to her. She's talking about starving Syria of their key resources. Syria was never an oil-producing nation. I hope you understand what I mean by that. It wasn't the situation where Syria was just bukus producing oil. That oil, however, is needed for the state itself to subsist. But let her talk about her multi-layered approach to destroying and making the lives of the people in that country miserable.
Territory that the U.S. military and our military presence owned, both to fight ISIS and also as leverage for affecting the overall political process for the broader Syrian conflict. There were 3 other areas of leverage. One is political and diplomatic isolation of the Assad regime, so holding the line on diplomatic isolation, preventing embassies from going back into Damascus. 2 is the economic sanctions architecture. So some of this is part of the maximum pressure campaign of the Trump administration on Iran, but there's a whole suite of both executive and congressional sanctions on Syria and Bashar al-Assad, both for human rights abuses in Syria and to the backers of Assad for their activities in support of him in Syria.
Isn't this extraordinary? Like, I listen to this and I think, It's amazing that people can say stuff like this. It's not so much that I don't think Assad is a dictator, nor is it that I think Assad isn't brutal. I think both of those things are true. It's more so that it is none of my business, and that if you believe that starting or helping to provoke and persist a war where you are backing terrorists in order to keep this war going, where 500,000 lives have been extinguished, not to mention the head choppers and the rapists that we were sending into that country. I tell you this, if you talk to the Syrians and ask them, do you prefer the head choppers or do you prefer Assad? They would say Assad. They would say Assad. Maybe this woman hasn't talked to those people, but when you look at the interviews, when you watch the interviews, they say it very clearly. We didn't like the head choppers. We didn't like the rapists. Why do you keep sending them here? Again, two things can be true at once. I'm making the point that my responsibility, our collective responsibility in this country has nothing to do with them. It has to do with us and what we do. Having our military, not to mention using our military to steal land and to use that in this regime change war to try to get rid of Assad and then talk about it in these sanitized terms. Well, our leverage, our pressure, we had a small footprint. You were supporting terrorists. You were supporting terrorists. And you had those rapists and head choppers to go into that country to create all sorts of havoc and chaos to try to get rid of Assad, and then stealing various tracts of land in order to starve the government using sanctions and the theft of the oil. Call it what it is. Don't sanitize it. If you're going to do it, call it what it is. Tulsi, thankfully, somebody
both
has been willing to call it what it is.
President Trump's statements confirmed by Secretary of Defense Mark Esper confirmed that his intent is to deploy U.S. troops to protect Syrian oil that does not belong to us. And President Trump talked about, yeah, we'll take some for ourselves and maybe send an ExxonMobil to manage that for us. Secretary Esper, when asked, he confirmed that this was the case. And when asked, well, you're going to fight to protect this oil even from the Syrians and the Russians? And he said, yes. To be clear, we're talking about resources, oil that does not belong to the United States. It's Syrian oil. It belongs to Syrian people.
Notice the expression on her face. I hope you saw that. The expression on her face. She's looking like, how the fuck does this work? And I kind of even wish she said that. How the fuck does this work? How do you do that? Even if you say, we're going to protect this oil so ISIS don't get it, fine. But are you also protecting it from the Syrian government? Yes. And you're going to steal some for yourself? Yes. We're going to do all of those things. How the fuck does this work? The look on her face gets at her. She's like, he's yes. You have the right to be confused, Tulsi, because this is beyond the fucking pale. Let's hear again.
Even from the Syrians and the Russians? And he said, yes. To be clear, we're talking about resources, oil that does not belong to the United States. It's Syrian oil. It belongs to Syrian people. Number one, it is a disservice to our troops to dishonor them by sending them on a mission that has nothing to do with our national security.
Yes, yes, yes. You've turned our servicemen into thieves. I hope you understand what she's talking about. Her basic argument is that putting on the uniform, there's 2% of the public that serves in the military. And these people, for all intents and purposes, are leveraging their bravery. Meaning the U.S. military or the United States is leveraging the bravery of these troops who supposedly put this military or put their uniform on for protection of this country, not for regime change. I hope you understand what I mean. protection of this country, will you serve and honor the United States and the people and represent those people in an honorable way? Yes. Now, I know a lot of fluff and everything else is put into this, but the basic point remains. You're sending our troops into a country, into an area that you acknowledge was for a regime change war. And now you're telling them, now I need you to steal the resources of that country. Thanks for your service. Are you holding it for the Syrians? Nope. We're going to take some for ourselves, and we're going to keep it away from the Syrian government and the Russians. Wait, but it's not ours. Just follow your orders.
This is about oil. Number two, Congress has not authorized this. Our troops have been in Syria under the authorization of Congress that was passed shortly after 9/11 to defeat Al-Qaeda and its affiliates and offshoots like ISIS. Doesn't matter what they say. You know, they said, oh, they want to protect this oil from ISIS. But that follow-up question to Secretary Esper, he said, well, actually, yeah, well, we're gonna keep this oil from the Syrians who actually own the oil and the Russians so that we can make sure that we give the money to the Syrian Kurds so that they can buy more vehicles and weapons to fight ISIS. They're being very, as you said, being very blatant and transparent about their purpose. The problem is it's illegal and unconstitutional.
And they're in Syria, by the way. They're in Syria. You're talking about an autonomous region that the United States government is propping up. And it's like, yeah, we're going to steal the oil and we're going to give that money to the Kurds. You're in Syria. You're in Syria. What right does the United States have to do this? What legal fiction, what fig leaf is the United States using to do this? Stealing oil brazenly from the rightful government of that country. It's fucking astonishing. And I love the fact that she's like, it's Syrian oil. And for that level of honesty, for her looking at the world and just calling it what it is, something that the media and other politicians, even Bernie fucking Sanders, will never do. She's calling aside toady, a Putin puppet. There was one video the other day where a woman says, so some of your policies line up with Donald Trump and the Russians. What do you say about that? And she's looking at, I think the American public is smarter than that. In essence, I think the American public is smarter than you. Somebody looks at the world in this very specific instance and calls it exactly what it is. The president said he's protecting the oil. He's protecting it from the rightful government of that country. That's called theft. That's called theft. Thank you, Tulsi. I appreciate that. That's rare, and I appreciate it. Marcus Wills, Saudi Arabia produces 12 million barrels a day. Syria, 30,000. This is not for profit. I know we're in Syria for Israel. Well, yes, Israel, but also to keep it from the Syrians. I hope you understand what I mean. When that secondary question, it's not like Syria produces a lot of oil. So at the bottom, I have an article by LA Times that gets into that. Like, these guys are not a major oil producers. These guys were never a major oil producer. So what on earth would the United States get from stealing oil from Syria? Not to mention the United States is an oil producer at this point. It's to keep it from the Syrian government. It's to starve the Syrian government. You heard that woman, that neocon talking about the multi-layer approach in order to crush and shape the future of the country at that point. And yeah, in part Israel. In part Israel. All right, like, share, subscribe. This is so aggravating to me. We've created a Frankenstein monster in regards to our military. And we're sending that military out almost, as she said, land that we own, land that we stole. How do we own land in Syria? Think about what that woman said. How do we own land in Syria? We own it entirely and purely because our military occupy it. Taking your car, I got a gun, you better get away from me. That's effectively what is taking place. And the media looks at this and says, okay, And I'm astonished that the media looks at this and says, okay, because it's so brazen and so over the top in regards to theft. This is how we own it. This is how we own it. They will blow your head off if you tried to get the oil fields back. That's how they own it. No legitimacy, international law, or by our own laws. None whatsoever. We've sent our troops out on a mission that is dishonorable. It's theft. It's not their fault. You can say it's their fault in the sense that they continue to serve. But ultimately, it's the president of the United States that sent them there. And it's the political class that doesn't say anything about it. It's the media that doesn't say anything about it. And they allow this to be absolutely okay when this is not okay at all. I can sit above a system and look at what is taking place. None of this stuff is real. None of the policies, none of the laws, none of that stuff is real. None of it's real. And yet, here we are. And yet, here we are. What's real is that they're out here with these vehicles. What is real is that they can put a bullet and shoot you in the face. What is real is that they are keeping this oil from the rightful government of Syria. What is real is that they're doing this because the President of the United States told them to. But this is not an honorable act, despite the fact that they're serving, supposedly, with honor. They're doing the job that the President of the United States told them to do. I can look at this process. You can look at this process. And you can say, this is wrong. This is wrong by our laws. This is wrong by international laws. And it is wrong in the sense that we are making people's lives miserable in order to steal and to put pressure on a government that is not our own. Tulsi is right. This is a dishonorable act. The dishonor at this point belongs to the president, to the media, and to the political class that doesn't say anything about this, that allows this to persist itself just by not saying anything about it, meaning they co-sign it just by their silence. I appreciate Tulsi saying something, and that I'm not the only one out here screaming that this is a big, big deal. Marcus Will, the point is Israel lobby is stronger than Oil Corp. No, Marcus, I do agree with you that part of this is Israel. Amir Ferrer, can you talk about her two bills about declassifying 9/11? Yes. Documented about Saudi Arabia and leaving Syria. Yes. I'm going to do a separate video on that, Amir. I've been thinking about that one and I had it in my notebook and I just never got around to it. Marcus, yes. Part of this is about Israel. Keep in mind, though, these things aren't all of one thing or all of another. Oftentimes, there are multi-layers, as if that, like the neocon said, that has to do with this. And if I'm not mistaken, she even hits on Israel in this speech, meaning towards the end of this. I could be wrong. In fact, I'll put what she's saying in the bottom so you can see it also. I could be wrong, but I think she mentions Israel as one of the options or one of the reasons that they're in there. But it's a multi-layered geopolitics is not all of one thing or the other. I mean, oftentimes there's multiple reasons for it. This, or the effort in this, is to starve the Syrian government of that resource that they require. As she said, part of that is to put pressure on the government using sanctions also, but in addition to that, taking the areas of Syria that are most, you could say, oil rich, not to mention food rich. Food was another one of the weapons that they were using against the Syrian government. This is not a one thing reason. I guess that's my point. Like, share, subscribe. They call that woman an aside toady for this. She is literally just looking at the world and calling the world what it is. And they call that woman a toady. I'm astonished by that. And yet she still does her thing. That's why I support her. I mean, yes, Sanders is a person that I'm voting for, but when people ask me, why do you support Gabbard? Why do you support Gabbard? And they would point to this thing or that thing that I'm supposed to be mad or angry at. But in this case, there's one very specific issue. I can have candidates that I support for whatever reason that I want to support them. These are, you could say, pieces to me in somewhat of a larger game board. I want her making that very specific argument because nobody else is making that very specific argument. And she takes the slings and the arrows, and they burned her so much for this that at this point they've inoculated her to some degree and not stopping her. Meaning they've hit her so unfairly and so much on this stuff that she is strengthened by it, not weakened by it. Tulsi says something. She gets credit for it. Like, share, subscribe.